group that exists in CD2. We've been down here since Trump got elected, and we're standing up for folks all over. And in our best tradition, we're having a person in tonight to discuss weighty issues, much like the revolutionaries did early in our history. And so I would like you to all consider this as you have your discussions tonight, that these are important matters, and IREB brings this to our community for purposes of your edification. So moving right on.
So hello, my name is Adam Nikolai. I'm with IREB as well. We got some chairs in the front. Anywhere you want to sit? You want to go towards the back?
Back here too.
Yep, you're good right there. I've gotten involved with IREB over the last year or so. I'm in the leadership for that, and kind of moving through that. I've also come into to be a director with CD2 for the DFL and for the SD51, the local DFL here. So I'm really excited to be here tonight with Professor Painter, who is running as a Democrat for the U.S. Senate.
Woo!
Who was not aware of that. So I was asked to introduce him. I can tell you the basics. He's a professor of law at the U of M. He was a White House ethics lawyer in George W. Bush's administration. Some of us were not so fond of George W. Bush's administration, and so we'd like to hear a little bit more about that. But he's been very outspoken on the political scene in the last few years, and I'm sure a number of people that I've talked to have heard of him. You know, it's not like they didn't know who he was. He's here to talk with us tonight. I actually met with him last night in DFL 58, and I see some familiar faces here who were there last night. So there will be some follow-up questions that kind of grew out of that, but I'm also going to ask the same type of questions that I asked last night, particularly the ones with regard to the fact that while we really like what he's been saying over the last year and a half, this man has been a Republican for most of his life. In fact, as of last December, he was tweeting that he is still a Republican, and so we want to talk about that as well. So we're going to do that. So did you want to say a few words before we get started?
Well, I'm happy to talk about what's happened to political parties with you. I had lunch today with former Senator Dave Dornberg, and you know, he's of the opinion that, obviously the Republican Party has gone way, way off the right end of the political spectrum, and now, you know, we all feel a serious threat from President Donald Trump, a threat to our democracy. But there's serious questions also about the DFL and whether it wants to stand up for single-payer health care or some health care arrangement that's going to assure 100% of Americans without being ridiculously expensive. And we don't want to talk about that issue. So is the DFL going to continue? I think a lot of people at the DFL are catering to the medical device industry because it's powerful in our state. And that Democrats in some other states, New Jersey, California, are under pressure to cater to the drug companies. And then the insurance companies have influence in yet other states. We're never going to get a healthcare system that works if we have political parties, Republican and or Democrat, they're dominated by the industry. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about campaign finance reform. I want to talk about the environment, whether we're serious about protecting our waterways in this state from copper and nickel mining. That is proven to be dangerous. And if there's anyone who wants to support the copper and nickel mining proposals and wants to discuss it with me, let's have a discussion about it. But I think they're dangerous, and also that the people running these copper and nickel mines in Minnesota or proposed to are not very scrupulous, and I'm happy to talk about that. Obviously, we've got a problem with Donald Trump. We've got to figure out what to do with him. First step, maybe, is to do what the House and Senate did when I was 12 years old, which was convene hearings of the House and Senate Judiciary Committee to investigate abuse of power, other illegal acts, violations of the Constitution in the executive branch, including the president, and including what we know about the vice president. We have some serious concerns about what's going on. I think there is a lot of evidence of serious crimes being committed in this administration that, if demonstrated at such hearings, would justify removal of the president and potentially the vice president. So I want to talk about that. And is the Senate, is the House going to take these issues seriously? We have a very, very bad situation in Washington right now with a president who was elected in part due to the influence of a hostile foreign power who does not believe in the Constitution, I could spend a good half hour going through the provisions of the Constitution that he chooses to ignore. Happy to get into some details, but we have a very, very serious situation, and the question is, what is the House and Senate, what are they going to do about it? And is it really going to change simply because Democrats get control of one or two of the chambers? And you can't just have passive Democrats in there who are going to go along and just get some sort of a deal from the president in return for 2 more years of abusing his power in office and undermining the Constitution of the United States. We've got to draw the line. So happy to talk about that. So let's get into some questions and go from there.
And I think we do want to talk about that. I know that for me personally, that kind of stuff is the stuff that I was not hearing anywhere else, and it was always really nice to hear Rich Painter say that stuff. But you're running as a Democrat now.
Yes.
So tell me, why are you a Democrat?
Well, I have the positions I do on issues, and I've looked at the opinions of many people in the Democratic Party, not all, and I think there's some agreement, at least with respect to some of the issues. I just mentioned some of the issues. I'm happy to go into some others. But if you look at my views on issues, and the views of many Democratic voters, and the views of many Republican voters, you would find that there are going to be more issues that I'm aligned with the Democratic voters. And that's due to a fundamental change in the nature of the Republican Party over the years. I want to emphasize that there are issues where Arne Carlson, Dave Durenberg, or other people may very well be more progressive than some current Democratic party office holders. And you got to look at the DFL, what's going on here. But the Republican Party, forget it. There's been an enormous shift in the Republican Party over several decades on a wide range of issues. And so we don't have the alignment there. Now, am I going to agree with Democrats on everything? No. We've already talked about some of them. The establishment in this state is for various mining operations in this state. I think it would be very dangerous. I'm not so sure that every Democrat in the House and Senate is willing to stand up to Donald Trump, as opposed to wanting to work side deals. To just let him hang around and do what he wants, so long as he gives people what they want. I'm happy to talk about that. Campaign finance. I'm categorically against PACs. I will not take money from PACs. So that's a difference with both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party.
Yes. You guys can come on in. Otherwise, if you want to hang out there, you can do it too. So, can you tell us why you were a Republican? Because the writing's been on the wall for a while about the Republican Party, the direction it's going. A lot of us were appalled when Donald Trump got nominated, but not surprised. It seemed like the Republican Party was going down that path for a long time. Did it seem that way to you? And if it did, why did you stay there so long?
Well, I felt I ought to try and turn it around. We need 2 parties in this country that want to participate in democracy. Remember, we used to have progressive Republicans. And I'm going to repeat, I believe that some Republican office holders in this state have positions that are more progressive than current Democrat, farmer, labor candidates. You can look at that in the comparison with respect to how much are elected politicians going to be in the back pocket of industry doing what industry wants as opposed to what the people want. So we've had progressive Republicans. What happened in the Republican Party is a trend that really goes back to Nixon bringing in the South, the Southern strategy, and then Reagan, who fundamentally changed the approach with respect to some social issues. And then over the years, these elements in the party that had very right-wing views on various social issues started to dominate the party, and it got worse and worse. It reached a point in 2016 where the divisions of the Republican Party were so obvious that it was really a very weak party. And that's how Donald Trump got control. I mean, nobody wanted Donald Trump in the Republican Party, but it was a completely disorganized and really quite divided party. A lot of people are very angry about these changes over the decades, including myself. And then people going for the cheap solution, which was Donald Trump. I felt that I'd been involved in the Republican Party in Central Illinois, where I grew up. Down in Central Illinois, many people voted Republican. A lot of people did because the Chicago machine was controlled by Democrats. There's still a lot of resentment of that Chicago machine. Under Mayor Daley, they would not bring African Americans to the Democratic National Convention. They still got a man in charge of the Illinois State Legislature, Mike Madigan, nicknamed the Velvet Hammer, and he is the man who cuts the deals And if you don't do what he wants, he cuts you out. And there's a woman as a state legislator who's exposed to sexual harassment scandal. We're going to see how long he lasts. But still, Illinois has that problem. And downstate Illinois, where I live, we believe the Republican Party was a useful counterweight. And that turned out the Republican Party of Illinois was just as corrupt. We've had a Republican governor go to jail and serve his term concurrently with a Democratic governor in Illinois. Governor Ryan and Governor Blagojevich. I mean, I was amazed. I was living in Illinois, and I remember Barack Obama, very well liked by everybody, and very, very honest. Politicians in Illinois seem to be either very, very honest or end up in jail. And the honest ones, they try to ship to Washington, get them out of there. So anyway, I was a Republican. I thought the Republican Party is a useful counterweight. That's many of us believe. But it has turned out that the corruption, particularly with campaign finance in the Republican Party, is as bad, and I think in recent years, worse than what's going on in the Democratic Party. But those of you who are Democrats, do not give yourself a pass. When you see money coming in from industry in PACs and super PACs and fundraisers at the chief executive officer's home, you see that kind of thing going on, say no. It's got to stop. We want people to represent the people of this state in Congress and in our state legislature and as our next governor.
Did you vote for Obama?
Obama, yes.
Can you tell us which parts of the Republican Party platform you still agree with?
I have to look at the platform. I don't like platforms. I don't think they never. I don't know what's in there.
I mean, broadly speaking,
let's look at the issues.
Yeah, well, I mean, issue-wise,
I've gone through that whole platform. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense.
So I'm using platform as kind of a euphemism in this.
Yeah.
You know, like their positions, their standard positions on social issues, taxation, role of government. Are there any of those types of places where you still...
I'm not going to go through every single thing in the platform, because I think a lot of the party platforms, quite frankly, they don't say much. They don't make much by way of commitments. Let's start with the issues. If you want to talk about the position on abortion, that's what that changed in 1980. The Republican Party was dominated more by pro-choice people, did not want government involved in that kind of decision before 1980. At least a lot of people felt that way, and President Reagan, candidate Reagan, decided to change that. I think that was a mistake. I mean, that is a very difficult moral decision, and I understand there are two different sides of that debate, and I think it's critically important to respect people on both sides of that debate. We have close friends who feel very strongly about abortion. But at the end of the day, it is not something that the government ought to be telling people what to do. A woman has a right to make that decision. Roe versus Wade is an opinion written by a Justice Blackmun from Minnesota, nominated by a Republican president, signed off on by Chief Justice Berger, who is also a Republican. I mean, this is a trend, I mean, started by Reagan and the Republican Party that I think is fundamentally contrary to the notion of small government. You can have government getting involved in people's personal decisions, whether it's abortion or marriage, who you marry, end-of-life decisions. That's where we need to get government out of people's business. Now, there are other areas, such as gun regulation, where you need to have some law and order. When you read the Second Amendment, it refers to a well-regulated militia. So what's happened there is, if the Republican Party wants to talk about Second Amendment rights, they'll say, yeah, I agree with Second Amendment rights, but don't forget about the part of a well-regulated militia. And that's not what's going on right now. We got people shooting up the schools. So we need to have a system of regulation of gun transfers, gun ownership. I think that, you know, what we've done with automobiles obviously is not a perfect analogy because it's a different set of problems. But it's amazing to me that people feel that their liberty is threatened if the government knew how many guns you had and required a license, whereas people don't feel that their right to drive is somehow interfered with because the government knows how many automobiles there are.
Or have a dog.
Or a dog, yeah. Man, some of these towns, you got to register your dog. So it's amazing. So we can go through the issue. There are a lot of issues addressed in different party platforms, but you know, Mike Bloomberg was elected mayor of New York as a Republican. We know where he stands on gun control because as mayor of New York, he watched people getting killed right and left because of inadequate gun regulation. So this shouldn't be a partisan issue. Instead of talking about Republican versus Democrat, let's talk about where we are on the issues. And we got to unite this country instead of divide, because these should be issues that we all agree on. It's not a party game. When kids get shot in the schoolyard, do we care about whether their parents are Republicans or Democrats? We got to do something about that problem. Our kids are scared.
I mean, you do recognize, though, that as far as it not being a party issue, the party that's in control is critical. I mean, like with regards to, we can't get gun control on the floor for debate because Democrats don't have control.
Well, let me push back on that for a minute. We had 2 years where President Obama was president, and you had Democrats in control of both chambers. What happens with gun control? I'll tell you what happens. Yeah, because I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about what the NRA does to the Republican Party. It's called the NRA Protection Racket. So they've got the Republican Party locked down. And they make it clear, if you deviate from the NRA on anything, they're going to take you out in a primary. So that's how they take care of the Republicans. But how do they take care of the Democrats? They get a segment of Democrats. Not necessarily a lot, but enough to make the difference. In the United States House of Representatives, who represent districts with a lot of people who are pro-gun. And they convince those Democrats that they need to be opposed to gun regulation. For example, Kristen Gillibrand in New York, when she was a United States Congresswoman, was supportive of the NRA. And we have had some in this state who were supportive of the NRA in the United States Congress and then run for office statewide. And what happens to the Democratic Party when they run for office statewide is they put away their NRA hat, probably give it to the next person running the district. This is happening over and over again. So, yes, the NRA problem is much worse than the Republican Party. But the fact of the matter is that they've got this group of Democrats, what do you call them, blue dogs or whatever you call them, who they got locked down in these congressional districts, and they're taking NRA money. So it's not just wanting to appeal to that district, and the voters in that district is taking the money and then running for higher office. Then they, of course, get religion. And that's what happened to Senator Gillibrand. She's, of course, no longer for gun, for the NRA, and probably doesn't even remember them. But, that's the problem in the Democratic Party. So let's focus on the NRA as a serious threat to our democracy. And it is causing that, it is getting what it wants through infiltration of all of the Republican Party and a segment of the Democratic Party. And that means that getting control of the House and Senate and even the presidency may or may not give you the gun regulations we need. It did not during the first 2 years of the Obama administration, although I'm convinced that President Obama would have signed anything that was put on his desk by that Congress that would do something about these killings.
So fundamentally, so we kind of talked about Republican versus Democrat. I want to get to really the fundamental difference that I see between the two of them, which is the role the government has to play in improving people's lives. Do you think the government has a role to play there, and what do you think that role is?
I think it's a role that needs to be, yes, the government has a role. The government needs to undertake that role responsibly. The government needs to spend money, taxpayer money, on what government is supposed to spend taxpayer money on. Let's start with schools. Teachers are underpaid. Schools are in disrepair. I'm not talking about the schools in the urban areas, in the suburban areas, but in some of the inner city schools are in bad repair. And in northern Minnesota, the rural areas, in bad repair. We are not spending on education where we ought to, and teachers are way underpaid in this state. What does government do? They dump hundreds of millions of dollars into a football stadium for an NFL owner who's a billionaire.
Right.
Now, if people want to call that so-called public-private partnership, that is wasteful government spending, and I am not going to endorse it. And the United States Congress should take away the tax-exempt authority of states that kowtow to those billionaire NFL owners and do those kinds of deals. And that is what makes voters angry at government. Yeah. And then that anger at government spills over into anger at legitimate roles of government. We should spend more on schools, more on teacher compensation, have class sizes that are reasonable. We should have a healthcare system that covers every single American. And single payer, we can go into that, is a much more practical solution. Every other industrialized country, I believe, has something resembling single payer. We don't. So there are a lot of things that government can do and should be doing. But if government is going to be throwing money at the pork barrel projects, and we've got this on the federal level, instead of an NFL stadium, it's the massive defense budget. And President Eisenhower warned about that, the so-called military-industrial complex, and all the defense companies that want to feed off of the government budget. And then we got the for-profit colleges, and then the Wall Street bailouts. So my answer to your question is, what is government doing? The government is helping make people's lives better, educating our children, keeping people healthy, protecting the environment, then I'm all for it. The government's throwing money around, giving it to billionaires, working these public-private partnerships where the public always gets the short end of the stick. I'm saying no way.
How about a robust government-sponsored social safety net? So things like welfare, food stamps, unemployment.
Okay, let's start with, welfare roll. I fully support that. Food stamps, what we've got works, but someone should be able to use food stamps at the cashier without the humiliation of a cashier, somebody staring at, oh gee, you're using food stamps and so forth. You should have some sort of a direct pay system or something that's quite easy. What you don't want is what President Trump is proposing. We're going to have a Trump care package or something with a great big T on it with a bunch of sugary foods or whatever he wants to put in there. In other words, I am for a social safety net, but you need to get the people who are receiving assistance through the social safety net the same choices that other people have. And let's talk about housing, for example. There are two different approaches to housing. One is to have these large subsidized housing projects through HUD money and state money. We've got a bunch of them here in Minnesota. Apparently Sean Hannity is investing in HUD housing now. All right, so you can start to see this so-called public-private partnership thing coming up. And we got a real estate developer around here called Dominion that I think makes a huge amount of money off these deals. So there are people making a lot of money on public housing. And in many places, including Minnesota, this public housing is highly segregated. There's a study, two studies in University of Minnesota Law School webpage conducted by Myron Orfeld, who's my a colleague at the law school, about this. So right there, we could have a program which may have good intentions, but which you end up with is a lot of people making money on the side, whether it's this Dominion developer that has all sorts of connections with both parties, or Sean Hannity. And the result that really isn't what you would want if public money is being spent, which is highly segregated housing. An alternative approach would be just simply a direct pay system. Say, look, if your income falls below a certain level, then the state with some federal assistance is going to kick in a certain amount toward your rent. You could call it a voucher, or you just call it have an account with a credit card or whatever, and you just take that to the landlord and you pay. And then all you need is a law that prohibits the landlord from discriminating against someone because of the source of payment. The advantage of that latter approach is it gives a lot more freedom to the person who is receiving the assistance to make the choices they want to make, so you don't end up in segregated housing. And furthermore, we might cut out some of those middlemen who are making all that money, the big construction companies, and I know we're giving money to the politicians in both parties, and of course Sean Hannity, because I don't want him in the business. So we need a social safety net, but we need to do it in a way that gets help to people who need it and gives people who are receiving assistance maximum flexibility to be good parents, to pursue education and pursue opportunities for themselves. And it shouldn't be an opportunity for for people to feed at the trough who are business developers, investors, and so forth. That's not the point of a social safety net.
Thank you. So we talked about you have issues with Republicans, obviously. You also have issues with the Democrats. And we talked about this a little bit last night, but I'd like you to address it again for a new audience. Why didn't you choose to run as an independent?
When you hear my views of the issues, by the end of the evening, you're probably going to be convinced that I have more overlap with most Democratic voters than with most Republican voters. So in a system without ranked choice voting, what that would mean is that I would end up dividing the vote in any normal election. And now you have an extraordinary election where Trump is the issue. And people know what I think about Trump, and I don't think that Senator Smith thinks too much of Trump. She's just not going to be quite as, well, in your face as President Trump, I would say. But she, I'm sure, doesn't like President Trump a great deal. And so what you can find is a pro-Trump vote going one direction and the anti-Trump vote splitting, and that would put Karen Housley in there. And I don't think that's a good idea with Trump in the White House to give him a Republican senator who can just kowtow to his wishes. With all due respect to Senator Housley, I just don't think that that's the appropriate thing to do right now, and I'm not going to throw this election.
Did you vote for Al Franken in 2014, if I can ask?
2014, I think so, yes. Who did he run against? Oh, McFadden? Oh, yeah. Oh, that guy. I think he had a big portfolio or something. I don't know what he did. A conference coming out.
So I don't remember where I heard this, but I thought I had heard that you didn't vote in 2014.
2014. Wait a minute. 2014. I supported Franken. You're right, because I was at Harvard on leave at Harvard 2014-15.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Correction.
So you were
I supported Franken. I would have voted for Franken. I was on leave at Harvard University in September 2014 to June 2015, working on a book on campaign finance reform called Taxation Only with Representation. They actually paid my salary for the year just to write this book. It was at the Safra Center for Ethics. And then I came back here in 2015. So I missed the election. I put my kids in public school in Western Massachusetts. And I think there might be some issues. Your kids are in school in Western Massachusetts and you're voting in Minnesota. So took a pass on that one.
And just because I don't think the answer is necessarily obvious, I want to ask it. I assume you didn't vote for Trump in 2016, but did you vote for Clinton? Or did you?
Yeah, no, I wrote an op-ed in the Star Tribune explaining exactly why I voted for Clinton. What I did with Trump, I feel Trump is a threat to our democracy, and I felt that when he first opened his mouth. Yeah, well, I knew that back when I was in New York as a young lawyer, and he had a terrible reputation. We all thought he was a Democrat because the Democrats were in control of New York. He was busy trying to grease the skids with the Democrats that control City Hall, but then Giuliani got in there, and he started to become a Republican because he just wanted to get stuff in New York. But anyway, when he started talking about a Muslim ban, you know, I'd never heard that kind of rhetoric from anyone running for president of the United States. He did have that rhetoric in the 1932 election for president of Germany, and then the parliamentary elections thereafter, and that didn't work out so well. No, we do not tolerate that in the United States. Singling out a religious group for discrimination is right there in the First Amendment. And then he talked about a judge who was Mexican American as if he's somehow biased against him because he's Mexican American. You know, so Trump was absolutely unacceptable. And my view was that what we needed to do is stop Donald Trump. It wasn't a question of who I wanted to be president or who I agreed with. We needed to stop Donald Trump because he had the makings of a dictator. That's what I thought then, and he has convinced me in the White House that he still has the makings of a dictator, and we got to do something about it. So yes, Minnesota, I caucused for Marco Rubio. Why? Because I heard that Marco Rubio might win Minnesota in the Republican caucus. Not because I agree with him on issues. I don't. But at least Marco Rubio, I think, knows how to play within the democratic system. Although he's not doing a very good job of it in the Senate. But, you know, we need to stop Donald Trump. So I went to a Republican caucus, and I knew the poll numbers, said, okay, we're going to see what we can do to stop Donald Trump. And it did work in Minnesota. And
he's the only state he carried, I think.
He's the only state he carried. I mean, Donald Trump had enormous emotional appeal to a lot of people who show up for Republican primaries throughout the country. And I think it's potentially very, very dangerous. So yes, that's what I did, and then Rubio dropped me. I would say, okay, choose Bush, choose Kasich, whatever. But you know, I made it very clear in the Star Tribune when I wrote an op-ed on why I'd vote for Hillary Clinton. I mean, that's no comparison. You know, I might have differences with Hillary Clinton. I think she would have been better off if she had had a more distant relationship with Wall Street. But Clinton, I mean, Trump, he's completely in bed with Wall Street. So, and all the other problems.
And how about last vote question? 2016, how did you vote for the congressional candidate, Lewis versus Craig?
I don't know anybody who voted for Jason Lewis. Yeah. I mean, Jason Lewis? I mean, this is what the Republican Party's come to. I mean, he's even worse than the Eric Paulson. I keep telling people over there at Edina, you're upset about Eric Paulson, look what I get. I mean, you know, that's a no-brainer.
So the seat that you're looking to run for was Al Franken's seat, and one of the things that he had to deal with was the Strauss nomination to the 8th U.S. Circuit Court. That was the one where he put in a blue slip, or did not refuse to put in a blue slip to let him pass. Do you agree or disagree with that decision? Do you think you would have done the same if you were there?
That's our decision. I wrote about that in an article during the Obama administration about the blue slips. I don't like the blue slips, and they're being used quite aggressively through the Obama years to block nominees. And so what it meant is you have courts in some parts of the country, particularly the South and some other places, that are extremely conservative compared with the rest of the courts. So I do not like the blue slip system. I don't like the filibuster either. On the other hand, I don't think so much you go on the federal courts without the support of, let's say, 60 senators. I think that's the better approach rather than having a bare majority. So it'd be very hard for me to say whether, I don't like the blue slip. I complained about it a lot during the Obama years, and the way President Obama's nominees were being blocked by blue slips. And then, of course, then the playbook changes yet again, and everyone switches sides on what position they take on the blue slips. So that's when I got to say I don't know how to handle that vote, because the point is we need to have an agreement on judges that's reasonable. And blue slips I don't think are constructive. And I also don't think filibusters are constructive, and yet you really probably ought to have 60 votes to get somebody through. I think we would have fewer nominees who were at the fringes. I got a lot of these fights I got involved with. Goodwin Liu was a wonderful man from California, was nominated by President Obama for the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, and he got filibustered, and I wrote a whole bunch of op-eds. He got hate mail as I was supporting Goodwin Liu. And so that's a very, very hard issue. But what's really hard to do is to say, well, I take the position blue slips are bad when President Obama's in, and now blue slips are good when Trump. I don't know. That we've got to change that system.
And I think they've changed the system because they didn't care that he didn't put in the blue slip. So at least as far as whoever was running that committee, I can't remember who it was. Yeah, as far as they're concerned.
Well, it was the week in which the allegations were made against Senator Franken. I mean, there are consequences to that type of thing, and how that was handled. And Senator Grassley saw an opportunity, and I remember that because I was very concerned. I felt Senator Franken ought to have a hearing and find out the facts.
So you think you might have hit him on that because he looked?
Oh, absolutely. I think that this was a situation where there were allegations. I think you need to find out facts. You don't call for people's resignation. I think that's categorically wrong for people to do it. People were doing it, and so it was chaos on the Democratic side. And Senator Grassley saw an opportunity. So he just decided he's going to ignore Senator Franken's blue slip, and that's what happened. Now the blue slips, I think, are gone, or maybe they're selective. They're just making up the rules that go along, because the attitude that particularly the Republican caucus has is, well, whoever has the power makes all the rules. They keep changing the rules. Mm-hmm. But they definitely, as soon as all that came out, they did everything they could to undermine Franken.
On the topic of sexual harassment and assault, have you ever been accused of sexual harassment?
No.
Do you think there's any chance someone could come up and do it, based on anything you can recall?
Nothing I can recall that I did.
Okay. How would you address our nationwide epidemic of sexual assault and harassment?
We need to have laws that protect every single American from being subjected to sexual harassment in the workplace and sexual assault. What we've got right now is a complaint system at the EEOC that you can, at the state level, that theoretically works, but as a practical matter, what it means is that you are likely to have to leave a job in many circumstances if you pursue a sexual assault or harassment claim. And that poses a very serious economic problem for a large number of Americans, mostly women. They're, particularly gay men, are also often subject to harassment. For lower paying jobs, middle income jobs, people have to make tough decisions about whether they're going to protect themselves from sexual harassment or other forms of discrimination, workforce speak out, or do what they might be in their short term against economic security. People shouldn't have to make that decision, that choice, that difficult choice. So we need to think about how this complaint system works, and whether you have a temporary injunction against someone getting fired, or whether you have a system where people could get some unemployment compensation or something to make up for the pay if they have to change jobs while pursuing a sexual harassment claim. I don't know what we can do, but we've got to focus on this. If we don't provide a system where it's not just the famous or the people who've been sexually harassed by someone famous so we can get on the television, we aren't just talking about that. We've got to be talking about ordinary people who are subjected to sexual harassment on a regular basis, and are we fixing this system? Because I don't think it's working. And you should never have to make that choice. Stand up for your rights not to be harassed versus your next paycheck.
And so you would be in favor of something, for example, where the company paid in, I think you mentioned that.
I think that makes sense. I mean, you could have an insurance fund, somebody pays in, and one thing is, if someone wins a lawsuit, instead of this enormous payout, the plaintiff's lawyer's getting a lot, maybe a lot of that money gets put back in the fund to help other people.
To solve the healthcare crisis in this country. Do you think it's single payer? Do you think that's the way we need to move?
That's what I'm hearing. This is a problem. You need to insure everybody. Let's have that as a starting point. You've got to insure everybody. If you don't, then people aren't getting the preventative care they need, and it's going to cost a lot more later. And it's also a matter of fairness and justice. But it's devastating to our economy when people are uninsured. And almost always someone else ends up picking up the tab, eventually it's just going to be a lot higher. So you have to insure everybody. Now, once you take that as a given, how are we going to do it? Now, you could do it through extending the Affordable Care Act and just try and bring in more people and insure everybody with different health insurers that presumably could negotiate prices with different providers, with drug companies and medical device companies. Now, that's the system that the drug companies and the medical device companies would prefer. Because then they can continue to charge 2 or 3 times in the United States what they charge for the same product in Canada and Europe. So they're not going to favor single payer. But the advantage of single payer, well, you see it when you see the prices for drugs in Canada and Europe versus the United States. So it's just a question of economics. Do you want to pay more for your health insurance? And I guess I don't feel like paying more. And I don't think other people have to pay more for their health insurance. So we can have more profits for Medtronic. Even though, yes, Medtronic is here in Minnesota until they move their headquarters to Iowa and they pay taxes. But the point is that that is going to be an extremely expensive way to do it. We can do it that way, but we will shell out a lot of our gross national product for health insurance if we do it that way. With single payer, you have that negotiating power that they have in Canada and the European countries and other places that use single payer. I think that's the way to go. Now, that doesn't mean you're not socializing medicine. You're not taking the hospital side of it and the doctors and making them state employees. You're not nationalizing the drug companies. And no, you're not going to nationalize Medtronic and take away the CEO's house on Lake of the Isles. No, you're not doing that. But what you're doing is you're saying the insurance piece is going to be run either by a governmental or quasi-governmental agency. Or you get a different aid to different states or something, but you get to take that piece out. And the profits from the insurance company and the insurance company execs and the shareholders and all that. Take that piece out. At least that's the end game. And we can talk about the transition from here to there, which is tricky. But take that piece out, and you're going to save a lot. And then negotiate with Medtronic and the drug companies And believe me, they'll still have plenty of money left over. Don't worry about, everyone's going to be unemployed at Medtronic because they have to charge here what they charge in Canada or in the UK. They're not going to lose jobs. The CEO will be fine. Everybody will be happy. That's the way I do it. Getting from here to there is tricky because you got a lot of people who like their insurance, and you're not going to take it away. So you may want to phase this in, bring younger people into a single-payer plan. People who want to join it. I think it's critically important.
Public option, would you support
Public
that?
option, absolutely. Absolutely. We ultimately need to, and this is another point I've got to make about insurance, we've got to divorce the employment relationship from the health insurance. It makes absolutely no sense. This is where I've talked to a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs, or people who started in a company, they had a boring job at a company in the cubicle or whatever, and they want to start their own company. And they can't because of health care. They're worried about health care. And then they can't, if they do, they can't hire employees because of health care. And does that make sense? And so if you really believe in entrepreneurship and free enterprise, you would believe in fixing this problem and not letting 1/7 of the economy crush the rest, and entrepreneurship and the rest, and people in jobs they don't like simply because of the health care. It's completely inefficient. It makes absolutely no sense from a practical perspective. And I believe I could sell this to talk to a lot of people who might initially be resistant to the idea, associating it with, left-wing politics or something like that, and say, hey, look, tell me what the other answer to the problem is. Because what we're doing now makes no sense. And it's the business owners who see those bills coming in, and they're sky high. And now that Trump took out the individual mandate, watch them go. The rates are going up.
So I'd like to open the floor to questions, but I do want to ask just one more real quick. Last night, when we talked at the bar a little bit, you told me about your decision to run and kind of how it came up related to the case that you brought under emoluments violations. Can you talk about that and what the judge said and how it influenced your decision? I think people should hear.
Yeah. Well, okay. There are 3 separate lawsuits against President Trump for violation of the United States Constitution provision which prohibits receipt of profits and benefits from foreign governments. It's called the Emoluments Clause. A lot of people haven't talked about it. I started writing about it in the summer of 2016 a lot in various op-eds because of Trump. We knew he was going to have a problem here. But the founders of this country were very, very clear about this. You can't have people serving the government, in the United States government, getting profits and benefits from foreign governments. They're just going to get bought off. And it's an anti-corruption provision. It's absolutely critical. Well, Trump is obviously getting profits and benefits from foreign governments, not just in his hotel, but all over the place, because you've got foreign governments that buy a $14 million condo or something. He's got lines of credit from Chinese government-owned banks. He's got deals with sovereign wealth funds all over the world. Just recently, the Chinese government put a lot of money into a project that has the Trump name on it. He's going to get a lot of money off. And he was obviously overjoyed because he starts tweeting about how we need to save jobs in China. I said, what's with this guy? Well, it's called a payoff. Yeah, he's not very subtle. Pence is a lot more subtle. But anyway, so there's a reason that's in the Constitution. So obviously the House and Senate are supposed to be enforcing it, and they don't do diddly squat because they're still looking through Hillary Clinton's email or investigating the FBI. So what do we do? At Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, we went to federal district court in New York and sued the president in his official capacity. We got another lawsuit going with the Attorney General of the state of Maryland and District of Columbia. We assisted with that, and they sued them in Maryland. And then a third, Senator Blumenthal brought on behalf of a lot of Democrats in the House and Senate, saying that, gee, you didn't get our consent to that payment, and the Constitution actually requires consent from Congress if you're out, if you want to take these payments. So those 3 suits went in the court. Ours in New York, they looked at our group and they said, you're just a public citizen group. You're not governmental anything. You have no standing to bring this lawsuit. We disagree with that decision. We're appealing it to the Second Circuit. But the judge, Judge Daniels, also went on and on about how maybe the court shouldn't have to deal with this at all because Congress should deal with it. And he said Congress is not a potted plant. Well, this Congress is acting like a potted plant, so this November we're just going to take the pot, we're going to turn it upside down, and we're going to have to do some shaking there because somebody's got to do something about it. It's a serious threat to our democracy.
Yeah.
And by the way, I don't know what the deal is with the Russians and Trump, but all I know is in around 1993, nobody in the United States, nobody in New York that I talked to would loan him any money because he went default on $900 million worth of casino bonds. So I don't know who's loaning him money, but I sort of have some suspicions.
All right, let's go ahead and open up the floor. I don't know if we'll get to everybody, but we will try. Let's go ahead and start with Sarah.
Let's see, I had mine written down, so I'll try and remember it. But
That's right. Do you want me to just ask it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah's question was, she gave it to me before. As a fellow educator, I've been thinking about how we turn this devastation of our democracy into a learning experience. If we come through this in one piece, what are some of the lessons we have learned? How do we ensure this type of administration never gets elected or appointed again?
Vote in primaries, vote in general elections, vote in caucuses here in Minnesota for president. But show up and vote. Encourage other people to vote. We could have had a lot more participation, certainly on the Republican side. A lot of people felt. The problem with the Republican Party, for all the reasons I discussed, is they've alienated an enormous number of people who traditionally consider themselves Republicans. But they were not yet ready to go and get into the Hillary versus Bernie thing and that whole fray. So they just stayed out and said, well, we'll wait and see what November brings us. And a lot of people were unhappy with either option in November. So number one, teach the students that the importance of voting. Also, find out about candidates. Get the information about a candidate and the position on the issues. Candidates should have debates. Now, you can't require a candidate to debate, but that should be the norm, that we have debates. Record the debate, put that up on the YouTube or wherever, and people watch the debate and learn about what the candidate really thinks and how that candidate compares with another candidate, as opposed to what we've got going on right now, which is a lot of candidates that refuse to debate, and they just got a lot of PAC money ads and super PAC ads. But students should learn to be critical thinkers. And just like you don't buy that sugary cereal that they just because you got Tony the Tiger, whatever it was when I was a kid, but they have new ways of advertising junk food. The same thing with politics.
well, I guess I was thinking too about changes that need to be made in laws, possibly even to the Constitution. And I think you hit on some of those in some of the talking, like getting rid of the Citizen United and the dark money and the PAC money and whatnot, making that again illegal in politics. I think that the President and the Vice President, Speaker of the House have too much power.
Yeah.
I think that what I've seen happening is, and I think that some changes need to be made, and that may, again, have to be constitutional changes.
Yes, or the courts cracking down, or an understanding what Congress, so you've got three branches, so was Congress going to be more assertive vis-a-vis the President? The problem is, once again, it's a political football. Well, I agree with a lot of the things President Obama did as a matter of policy. He would, when faced with he was faced with a Republican Congress for 6 years, have to be quite aggressive about executive power. So what that meant is the Justice Department for 6 years was pushing some of the case law as much as they could with respect to executive power. Well, then Trump gets in there, and he gets to use all that. And if he ever confronts the Democratic Congress, which he's going to very soon, I think, at least in one of the houses, he's going to start doing the same thing with his Justice Department. And so what we've had is presidents of both parties pushing executive power, particularly if Congress isn't controlled by their party. And we had a falling back. We're pulling back from this after Nixon, because of the imperial presidency. People were so angry. So Jimmy Carter is less executive power, but from Reagan on forward, it's been an expansion, and I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That needs to be limited. Doing away with electoral college.
Yeah, the problem with reform, I'll tell you, try to fix the Constitution. I'm old enough to remember the Equal Rights Amendment. Yeah, you know, men and women are. I thought, that's a no-brainer. Most Republicans, I thought, were for it back in the 70s, but they ran around spreading rumors about how it meant unisex potties or something, and they want to get you worried. They get you all worried up about where you're going to go potty, and they killed it because you got to get through. Was it 3/4 of the state houses? So it's almost impossible to amend the Constitution. What I've done at Electoral College is I'm working with Lawrence Lessig at Harvard Law School and some others, going to court and also trying to persuade some state legislators that you need to allocate the electors proportionately. Mm-hmm. So we would have sent some Trump electors, but Wisconsin would have sent some Clinton electors. And if you allocated the electors proportionally in every single state, Bush v. Gore would have gone the other way, and so would Trump v. Clinton. So I think you would eliminate most all of the situations where you get the popular vote going one way and the electoral the other way. You do that without amending the Constitution. I think the courts actually ought to apply. I think it's a denial of my right to vote. If I were to vote in, let's say, Wisconsin, and I voted for Clinton, and not a single elector is going for Clinton, when 48% of the state or 45, whatever, Wisconsin went for Clinton.
All right, we've got about 13 minutes. I'm going to, as a thank you to the people for waiting outside, I'm going to call on the man just outside the door here with his hand up.
You have, you're very well known to be an expert on ethics. If the Senate is not behaving ethically, for instance, when Mitch McConnell refuses to even give a hearing to Merrick Garland, they have an ethical body within itself, a committee on ethics, but that's then themselves policing themselves. Is there a way that you could envision that could improve the way to hold the Senate accountable for ethics?
Well, this is the problem, is ethics can be defined broadly or narrowly. I think that question of whether he's abusing his power as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I believe in an unethical fashion to define ethics more broadly, I don't think that would fall under the purview of the Ethics Committee unless you could agree on a rule. If you agreed on a rule in the Senate, that's the way to address it. There's a rule, and there ought to be a rule, that every single nominee of a president gets a hearing. I have the view that someone's nominated for President Trump, I want to take care of President Trump first, and then I'll have the hearing. But anyway, I have to back off. If there's a rule, then there's a rule. And if the rule says I've got to, have the hearing and so forth, then we've got to have the hearing, if it's somebody I don't like because they're nominated by President Trump. And then if someone violates the rule, then you can take it to an ethics committee. What we need to do, though, is we need to tighten up the rules with respect to traditional ethics. Members of the United States House and Senate, there is no excuse to hold stock in defense companies and vote on defense contracts. Absolutely no excuse. It is legal, it is immoral, it is wrong to hold energy company stocks and to make decisions about energy policy, to hold medical device company stocks and make decisions about health care. Go through the list. And it's just wrong. So, but you need to change the rule. And so people say, is it a violation of the rules for Congressman Collins of New York to own healthcare company stocks while he is voting on healthcare in the United States House of Representatives? He's a Republican from upstate New York, from Buffalo. And no, it's not. He's not going to be charged. The voters throw him out in November. But right now, the voters have to do that. That's the answer. Now, we should change the rule. I think every member of the United States House and Senate should be required to hold mutual funds, insurance policies. Amy Klobuchar does. Most people do. A lot of them do. But they don't get the point. Presidents did until Donald Trump, of course, because he's special. But the members of Congress should be required to not have financial conflicts of interest. And here's another one. After they leave, they should have a lifetime ban on lobbying back to the House of the Senate.
That's a lot of hands. We'll go Dan.
Right in front was.
Okay, and then we'll come here, and then hopefully we'll come back here. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. We've been talking a lot about national issues and things that are sort of like in the news these days. But also part of being a representative from the state of Minnesota is working on the issues that Minnesotans believe in. I think of like Jim Oberstar as the chair of the Transportation Committee, brought a lot of transportation projects back to the state. Is the reason why we have really strong transportation infrastructure. Other issues like agriculture coming up as the Farm Bill is becoming more and more controversial. that died in the House recently, I believe. So that's, we're seeing a lot of big issues, particularly around those sort of less talked about issues, less newsworthy issues. Where do you stand on this? What are your views on, or what are your sense of the big issues in those sorts of areas?
Well, agriculture is a big one. Because if Trump gets this trade war going, our agricultural sector is going to be destroyed.
So
And that's why I told a lot of people in the Democratic Party they ought to take seriously trying to win in the first congressional district, because the agriculture community traditionally has been in favor of, going back to the 19th century, free trade. That doesn't mean you have free trade without some restrictions with respect to environmental issues, and I'm all for fair trade. I'm not for free trade. But Trump's policy is neither. It's just complete chaos. And so what he does is, in order to win a congressional district in the western Pennsylvania, which he didn't even get anyway, the one they lost to Connor Land, he announces these steel tariffs. And then very quickly thereafter, he's talking about a global trade war with not only China, but Europe and everybody else. And he's looking for a fight. The last time the Republican Party tried that was under Herbert Hoover in 1930. It didn't work very well. Now, what happens, though? He announces those tariffs, those steel tariffs. And not only some Republicans, but some Democrats took the bait, including senators from northeastern states and, I believe, the 2 senators from Minnesota, saying this is actually a good idea because it would be popular on the Iron Range. Well, I remember, now you can go look at it, but I don't think they were like, Trump is great. They're just, we welcome the tariffs. It was way more enthusiastic than I would have been. I would have slammed that idea. Yes, we need to respond to Chinese dumping of steel. And that's a threat, but there are ways to deal with that. If they're subsidizing their steel industry, we can subsidize ours. We can deal with it, but not with that loudmouth in the White House who's looking for a global trade war. That global trade war gets going, and he's going to destroy agriculture in this thing. So one thing is, don't take Trump bait, because he throws bait that will appeal to, oh gee, we can get a few votes on the Iron Range, and we're going to be pro steel tariffs and increase the price of the iron ore. Well, the long term. Now that all works out in the long term. Once you get a trade war, you destroy agriculture, and just go back and see what Herbert Hoover ended up with. And at the end of the day, the Iron Range isn't doing any better, doing a lot worse. So we need to think big picture, not just what is going to be, it looks like attractive, and that Trump can sort of throw at you to see whether you get distracted.
All right, let me go right here. And then I'm not going to get to everybody, so I'm wondering if you'd be willing to take a few questions outside.
Sure.
Okay.
We are actually going to gather, we normally gather after this meeting at El Loro. It's a Mexican restaurant right around the corner here. Happy hour is going on right now, and they got free chips, so we could continue the conversation there if anyone's interested.
That's socialism.
It's a Mexican restaurant. Trump won't be there. Oh,
Taco Bowl?
Taco Bowl.
It's not Cinco de Mayo.
You can run a restaurant, but you can't be a judge.
In 1959, the U.S. upper rates were 93%, and when Reagan was elected, they were 70%.
What rates?
The upper income, federal income.
Oh, the tax bracket, yeah.
Yeah. Since 1970, those rates have, for all practical purposes, been cut in half. The rough upper income bracket is around 35%. It's 39% this day, et cetera, et cetera. Can you expound on your belief of the effect that those tax changes have had on inequality of income in the United States?
It's highly likely that the tax changes have created an increase in income inequality. And, there's let's say you talk about the 1950s, and people progressive, some of them say, well, the 1950s were really bad because this, and this, and I would agree about racism and a number of other things, but there are a lot of things in the 1950s that actually were better. The percentage of the workforce that was unionized, the income distribution, the fact that, quite frankly, both political parties were trying to address, the interests of working Americans. And indeed, President Eisenhower did not call for huge tax cuts. It was Kennedy who had tax cuts, and combined tax cuts with a significant increase in military spending. And tax cuts plus military spending, which happened in the Kennedy-Johnson years, did not work out very well economically, and that's what we're getting. We got it under Reagan again, and now we're getting it under Trump. we're getting an increase in military spending and yet more tax cuts. And what that does, it creates a huge deficit and income inequality. So this has been a serious problem. Now, what would I do? I don't think I'd just raise taxes in order to collect more money and have politicians figure out what to do with it. I'd start first with the health care. My guess is about 10% of income is a reasonable amount to pay for health care. But it'd be 10% for everybody. Now, if you're below the poverty line, okay, we'll give it a break, or below 1.5 times the poverty line, and say, okay, you get free health care. But at a certain point, 10% kicks in, but then that ought to run all the way up. So, okay, you're making $2 million, you pay more for your health care, all right. But you know that your children, even if you go bankrupt, your children are going to get health care, even if they make nothing. And so, yes, I would have a surcharge. I might raise the taxes by, say everyone's going to pay, instead of you pay 35%, you pay 45% at the top bracket. But the deal is, you get health care for it. And everyone's going to get health care for it. Once again, we could think about education. Whether we could have a tax surcharge to help pay for education instead of what we're getting now, student loans. People say, what do you get after tax? Well, your taxes may not be that high, but then your student loan payments, there's nothing left. So we raise taxes. I have nothing against raising taxes, so long as there's services delivered. And delivered to everybody. And that we'll start with health care, and that's our #1 priority, and then we talk about the education issue and higher education. Social Security.
Well, because there's a cutoff, the rich don't pay Social Security beyond, what is it,
100.
Yeah. I think that if you raise it, you got to raise it all the way. I think that, you shouldn't just raise it about 50 grand. You're going to just create a lot of angry people in the, in that bracket. But raise it all the way.
Keep it what it is, but just increase that level up to all the way.
And let me just make sure we're almost out of time here. Did you, Lasher, did you have a question?
I did, but it was about the growing inequality in America
Okay.
and what we would do. So you just kind of address that.
Okay, let me jump over here. Go ahead.
Okay, to be succinct, I wrote my question down, so I'll just read it to you.
Sure.
You reject party labels, yet you want to be elected as a Democrat. So as a lifelong Democrat, I'm trying to understand where you fit within Democratic Party ideology. You've compared yourself to Wellstone and Humphrey, who were unabashed liberals. And from what you're saying, you support some very liberal issues. As recently as December, you described yourself as a moderate Republican, and I heard you on a recent Almanac appearance say you're not a liberal. Democrats are having our own intra-party debate about whether, as a party, we should be more centrist or move even further to the progressive left. Where do you see yourself on that Democratic Party ideological scale?
I don't like to talk ideology. I think these labels are useless. I think all this party, obsession with, well, are you loyal to the party is useless. I want to talk issues.
But let me...
I want to talk issues. I don't think that my position on single-payer health care is left. And if you want to characterize this left, you're going to lose. I want single-payer health care because it's right for every single American. Not because it's right for the Democratic Party or it ideologically fits in with some particular box. That's not the way we should think. That's the way you'll lose elections. Talk to all the American people.
But with all due respect, you are asking to run as a Democrat. You're asking Democrats to vote for you for a Democratic Party endorsement, and you're asking Democrats to vote for you in a Democratic Party. So I think it is incumbent upon Democrats to be able to identify for themselves where you fit within that ideology.
Ask me about an issue. I'm not going to sit there and belabor left, right, ideology, all this nonsense.
I'm a lifelong Democrat. I don't agree with everything that the Democratic Party goes with.
That's right.
So, yeah, well, then you're asking him.
I think that's a good place right here.
Let's head over to Elmore.